3 years ago, Stella asked me to marry her. Then she dumped me out of the blue. I managed to save our relationship only by promising we wouldn't make it legal. Later, after recovering from a serious illness, Stella said, "Let's go get married. Oliver, you can finally be my husband for real." I was peeling an apple. "I think we should just call it quits," I said flatly. "Honestly, when I look at you now, you're just so ordinary." That same day, I moved out, quit my job and sold my shares, disappearing from Stella's life completely. This time, I was the one who ended things abruptly, right when she loved me most. The day I planned to leave was the day Stella officially proposed to me. Still frail from her illness, she was a little pale. "Oliver," she said gently, "let's go get our marriage license." Hearing this, I kept peeling the apple in a long, continuous spiral, saying nothing. I had spent 8 years helping Stella build her company, but we never made it official. Getting married was the greatest show of love and sincerity she could offer me. But I didn't need it anymore. The duplex was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Stella, with uncharacteristic patience, broke the awkward silence. "You were by my side the whole time I was sick." "Thank you, Oliver. Let's get married for real." The fruit knife slipped, and the long apple peel fell onto the sofa. I set the apple down and looked at her. She smiled at me, confident and expectant. "I think we should just call it quits." The smile froze on Stella's lips. She struggled to keep her voice steady. "But didn't you always want to be my husband? You stayed with me through my illness. Wasn't this the reward you were looking for?" Looking for? She was wrong. A person can grovel for a time, but not forever. "I don't want that anymore," I replied calmly. "A title. When I loved her, I begged for it. Now that I didn't, it meant nothing." "Oliver, are you just trying to make a point?" Stella asked, pretending to be calm. I shook my head and walked slowly to the door. "You've been home from the hospital for 5 days. Haven't you noticed all my stuff is gone?" Stella's eyes widened, her red lips tightening into a thin line. She looked dazed, incredulous. I turned back to look at her one last time. The soft morning light traced her beautiful silhouette. In the eyes of the world, she was perfect. But in my eyes, Stella was just an ordinary, unremarkable woman. I smirked. "Stella, seriously, when I look at you now, you're just so ordinary. So ordinary that I can't imagine spending the rest of my life with you." She struggled to maintain her composure, but her face turned ashen. The truth is, for a small-town kid like me who had to test his way to the top, Stella was anything but ordinary. Her family's law firm catered exclusively to the ultra-rich, and they owned a villa at the foot of Ridgemont. Stella was beautiful, and the new company she managed was a rising star in the industry, on the verge of going public. I was just a member of her founding team, currently holding no significant position. We started the company 8 years ago. We got together in year 3. In year 5, she proposed to me in public, then abruptly broke up with me. I went to her family's home in a rainstorm, promising I wouldn't ask for a marriage certificate, promising I wanted nothing, just to get her to look at me again. That's how I bought myself 3 more years of her charity. When I got downstairs, Vivian was waiting for me in her car. Stella rushed out of the elevator and grabbed my arm. Her body was still weak, and she was breathing heavily. For a second, I felt a pang of my old instinct to protect her. Stella reined in her emotions. "You've been with me for 8 years. Don't you think leaving like this is too rash? Aren't you betraying your own past?" That last bit of sympathy vanished. I looked at her, puzzled. "Stella, do you want me to feel sorry about the past?" She clenched her jaw, silent. Even now, trying to win back her lover, the high and mighty Stella couldn't bring herself to bow her head. I tapped my finger on her chest. "I'm not worried about the sunk costs," I said dismissively. I shook her hand off, her face went white, and got in the car. She grabbed the car door. "Oliver," but she couldn't bring herself to say "I love you." My expression hardened. "Stella, when you were helpless during your recovery, even your parents didn't want to come. I was the only one there. I've done more than enough." With every word, Stella's face turned a deathly shade of gray. Her breath caught. Her tone was cautious, but her words were a threat. Oliver, if you leave, aren't you worried about your job at Nexus? Right now, I was just a sales manager, easily controlled. I lowered my eyes and let out a soft laugh. The woman who said she wanted to marry me, seeing me leave, didn't try to win me back or explain herself. She threatened me. I wasn't surprised. That's how she always treated me. I shut the car door without another word. The car pulled away quickly. In the rearview mirror, Stella's slender figure stood rigidly, proud and defiant, yet with the helplessness of someone who'd been abandoned. Fate has a funny way of working things out. Because I was the only one by her side when she was sick, she had fallen weakly in love with me. But I chose to leave, right when she loved me most. My heart felt like it had been torn open and was bleeding freely, but there was also a fleeting, satisfying rush of revenge. Familiar streets disappeared behind us. My phone vibrated. A text from Stella. Oliver, who was it that came begging to my family on a stormy night, treating himself like a product, listing his benefits, and negotiating terms just to stay with me? You went through all that trouble just to throw it all away? I knew she was proud, so this lashing out was just her anger and embarrassment talking. The faint tapping sound. I looked up. Raindrops were starting to dot the car window. It was raining. I was speechless for a moment, then I laughed. Tears slid down my cheeks and into my mouth, salty and bitter. I felt a sense of release. Between people, sometimes the only thing left to do is let go. I still remember the day I went to beg her family. It was January, and the rain was so heavy an umbrella was useless. I waited outside their villa for a long time, soaked to the bone before the housekeeper finally opened the door. I had to hunch over, shivering uncontrollably. The housekeeper kept mopping up the water dripping from my hair and clothes, muttering under her breath. Even after her father threw a cup of cold tea on me, I calmly presented myself as a commodity, speaking only of benefits. I had a good education and strong business skills. Our marriage could help build a steady, devoted public image for the young Stella, giving investors a better story to sell and stabilizing the company, and so on. In return, I wanted no legal ties, only the chance to be with her. By the end, her family was laughing. They probably never expected someone could have so little self-respect. In the end, they agreed to the deal. Cost them nothing. I smiled calmly and left with as much dignity as I could muster. I've always been like that, willing to sacrifice my pride to achieve my goal. As I walked out of the villa, Ridgemont was a hazy, gray-blue silhouette in the rainy night. I couldn't tell if I was trembling from the cold or a frozen heart. The pain was sharp, piercing. As I stepped into the dark, rainy night, I froze. Stella, who had been gone for 10 days, appeared on the covered walkway. She wore a khaki cashmere sweater, radiating the warmth of the house, and walked toward me in slippers. All my composure shattered. Tears flooded my eyes, blurring my vision. Like a drenched child, I rushed forward and hugged her tightly, a choked sob escaping my throat. I didn't get the familiar touch or comfort I expected. She laughed. Oliver, you're really trying hard to marry into our family, aren't you? You'd even agree to this? My mouth opened, but no sound came out. Do you really want to marry me? Or do you just want to latch onto my family? The rain fell like a curtain. Stella stood there. Her eyes held a gentle smile, but it was as thin as frost. Chilled me to the bone. I felt it then, in that moment, that our time together was living on borrowed time. But the Oliver of back then was fiercely optimistic, never giving up until the very last second. The rain fell harder, blurring my reflection in the car window. I glanced at the message on my screen. I smiled, resigned. You can't fight fate. You'll lose sooner or later. The car stopped in front of a law firm. My turbulent emotions instantly cooled. I wiped away my tears and straightened my clothes. Vivian was holding an umbrella open outside. I got out of the car. I was leaving. My past with Stella didn't matter anymore. For 3 days, I was at the law firm handling my shares. I had been waiting a year for them to be vested. When it was done, I got back in the car. Vivian handed me a coffee and a document. Mr. Dawson, I've got your proof of resignation from your former company. I've also booked your flight to Hong Kong in 10 days. I nodded. She was an alumna from my university. We'd often been in the same project groups. We had also worked together on a few deals years ago. She was capable and knew how to seize an opportunity. I planned to take her with me to Hong Kong. Just then, a message came from Fiona. Oliver, good thing you got out when you did. Today, the president's office announced a pay cut for your entire old department. So Stella was really using my job to threaten me. Too bad I'd already quit. Now that you've left, you can just be a good pillar of support for Ms. Lin. I'll take care of her at the company. I could almost picture Fiona's smug face. I smiled, not angry. I had submitted my resignation while Stella was in the hospital. Thanks to her absence, the process went through quickly. Stella never imagined I would leave. I didn't have a non-compete agreement, and my equity stake was almost non-existent. That's how I was able to move out, sell my shares, and quit my job all in one go. After a few loose ends, I'd be off to Hong Kong. It was evening when I got back to the hotel. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my suite and looked out at Ridgemont across the way. The vast purple sunset seemed to be quietly cheering for the new life I was about to begin. Stella, who had been silent for 3 days, appeared in my notifications. Her tone was still condescending, but it was faintly laced with a dark, unspoken plea. Oliver, come peel an apple for me, and I can cancel the pay cut for your whole team. She still didn't know I had quit. After she demoted me to work under Fiona, none of my work or reports went through her anymore. Oliver, don't be stubborn. I snorted. I knew she was the one being stubborn, but I didn't care. I went back to focusing on the business structure of the new company with Vivian. A new city, a new company, everything needed to be rebuilt from scratch. I had flown to Hong Kong 7 times, overnight, to get this opportunity. Life is vast. You can't just live in the confines of love and hate. Work made the time fly, and soon it was late at night. A light rain began to fall against the window, and the Bay City night was a hazy, gradient blue. Vivian went out to get me a late-night snack. I rubbed my temples. My eyes ached with fatigue. My phone screen lit up. Stella had sent a photo. In it, a slightly defiant Stella sat in a chair while I stood stiffly beside her. A soft pang of pain hit my chest. Stella knew exactly which buttons to push. The photo was from 8 years ago, taken as a memento in case the startup failed. It was true, we had good times. Less than 3 months after we started, all of Stella's rich friends had bailed. It was just me and her. She was a rich girl too, and she was ready to give up. But I had no other options. I'd missed campus recruitment season and had cut ties with my parents to stay in Bay City. Without a word, I worked for 3 straight nights, contacting clients and redoing the order sheets. I finally convinced Stella to keep the company going. After that, I was with her through all-nighters, through drinking until we coughed up blood, through begging and pleading with everyone we could, flying all over the country. In return, Stella was generous to me. When her family's housekeeper brought her meals, she'd always have a portion for me. It was so much better than the 10 takeout I was used to. I'd eat it with tears welling in my eyes. To make it easier for me to work late, she moved a mattress from her home that was worth thousands of dollars into the office. Sleeping at the office was more comfortable than my coffin-like rental apartment. During our toughest year, Stella gave me a $15,000 bonus out of her own pocket, far more than I expected. It doesn't seem like much now, but back then that number was beautiful. So beautiful that I wanted to shove it in my parents' faces and show them I was more capable of making it in the big city than my lazy brother. They could stop hoping to use my money to buy him a house and a wife. I didn't have to eat 10 takeout or sleep in a coffin-sized apartment. I was going to make something of myself. Overcome with emotion, I held the pay stub, crying and laughing. Stella stood nearby, arms crossed, her gaze falling on me like a feather. After a long moment, she let out a clear laugh. Behind her, sunlight dappled through the green leaves at the garage entrance. Her laughter, mixed with the buzz of summer cicadas, filled my heart. If it had ended there, I might have kept my distance, seeing Stella as just a good boss. That New Year's Eve, Stella pushed open the door, bringing in the damp chill of the city. Her hair was dotted with water droplets, her face flushed, and she was out of breath, lacking her usual composure. It was as if she had rushed to get there before midnight. She handed me a Japanese bento box, smiling sheepishly. This was the only decent place I could find open right now. Inside was an exquisite arrangement of sashimi and Japanese sweets. I began to eat slowly. Stella's voice was soft, yet heavy. Every word landed in my heart. She gently stroked my head. "Oliver, Happy New Year." My heart swelled until it ached, until tears flowed freely. I buried my head in the bento box, afraid she would see my pathetic state. A midnight moment like that was too ambiguous and too beautiful. Anyone would have fallen hopelessly in love with her. The third year, when she showed up just as expected, I threw caution to the wind, rushed forward, and kissed her. I had heard she was about to have an arranged engagement with someone of her social standing. This was my only chance. I had to seize it. Stella's lips were still cold from the outside air. She froze for a moment, her eyelashes fluttering like butterfly wings. Then she cupped the back of my neck and gave me a long, deep kiss that left me breathless. It was the best New Year's gift of my life. I thanked God for this blessing. It was that self-assured sense of beauty that made me unwilling to let go, that made me drag things out until now. But as they say, a full moon begins to wane, and a full cup will overflow. When a relationship starts with too much force, it's destined for a messy end. A steaming bowl of congee was placed in front of me. Vivian's bright eyes curved into a smile, her voice especially gentle in the late night. "Have some congee. It'll settle your stomach." I looked up at her, my face neutral. Tears that had been welling in my eyes slid down from the corners. She handed me a tissue, then calmly sat across from me and continued to read through documents. In the dim light, the light rain had faintly dampened her blouse, vaguely outlining her delicate figure. I took a spoonful of the warm congee. It warmed my stomach. I stepped out of the past. I set Stella's notifications to silent. I didn't delete her, didn't block her. The real way to cut ties is to leave them right there in your contacts, in your DMs. All messages are marked as read, but never answered. All calls go through but are never picked up. To be in the same city, but impossible to find. To break up with her out of the blue, right when she loved me most, that was the most fitting karma. I had been in Bay City for 8 years, but the loose ends to tie up were fewer than I'd expected. In 2 days, I had arranged for a service to manage my apartment, changed my information and documents, and ported my number. There was a sense of being adrift. I lay in the hotel garden, surrounded by shady trees and the faint chirping of insects. It was a prelude to the vibrant summer to come, a prelude to my own vigorous new beginning. Fiona called me. "Oliver, Stella didn't know you quit. You've ruined me." She's furious. She's tearing my whole department apart. Did you do this on purpose? Were you jealous that I was more appreciated at the company than you? So Stella knew I'd quit. The sun was a bit bright. I squinted and spoke lazily into the phone. "Fiona, I brought in almost all of your department's business. Why would I be competing with you for so-called appreciation? Remember this, you're beneath my notice." After hanging up, I scrolled through Stella's messages. My resignation had shattered her reality. How could Oliver leave Stella? How could Oliver survive without relying on Stella? "Oliver, you quit? Don't you think you've taken this too far? Your apartment is empty. Where are you? Where the hell are you going? Without me, how will you do business? You'll just end up back in your hometown, wasting away." Page after page of messages revealed her panic and disbelief. Just then, a notification came from my bank. "You have received a deposit of $450,000. Your new balance is $620,890. I stared at that bank alert for a long time. Only when I had completely let go of my feelings did the pain of the financial reality hit me. I knew the amount when I signed the contract, but it only felt real when the money arrived. It was a lot more than my savings from the last 8 years. It was also a little less than 20% of what executives who joined the company after me received. The stark contrast between the large number on its own and its relative smallness was the ultimate irony. I was one of the co-founders of Nexus. Nexus's first round of funding was secured because of a major client I brought in. Before I left, I was still the top performer. I should have been like the other founding members, holding a general manager title with millions in equity, sitting at the high-stakes table of Bay City's executive circle. But because of Stella, I was kicked from the table. Everything vanished into thin air. I regretted it. In a fit of despair, I ordered a 1,000 bottle of red wine from the hotel and asked Vivian to drink with me. We leaned back on the sofa, looking at Ridgemont across the way. The streetlights wound their way up the mountain like a river of stars. Stella's family home was at the tail end of that galaxy. Vivian was saying something, but I wasn't listening. It wasn't until the faint scent of gardenia drifted over that I gave her a flicker of attention. Vivian had moved closer, leaning against me. I thought when you asked me for a drink, it was an invitation. Oliver, I really like you. It was just like 3 years ago, when she came to discuss a partnership with us. She tried her best to seduce me, and Stella had even walked in on it. The dim light outlined her delicate features and curvaceous figure. She certainly had the looks to sleep her way to the top. In the quiet luxury suite, with the magnificent night view as a backdrop, the aroma of red wine fermented between us. The moment was perfect. I pulled her to me, kissing her lower lip before biting and tugging at it. As we became entangled, I felt the deep ravines in my heart being filled. The love and desire that had haunted me for the past 3 years found a moment of solace. Those 3 years of walking on eggshells with Stella taught me that the craving for affection is harder to endure than simple lust. That craving was a ghost that visited me late at night. It kept me awake, my pillow damp with silent tears, all because I wanted Stella's embrace, her kiss, her love. I was powerless against that desire, and the more I begged for her love, the more she despised me. As the storm passed, I sighed internally. What a shame. A shame it took me so long to realize that you don't need love to soothe that craving. You just need a beautiful woman. It was a wonderful discovery. I fell into a satisfied sleep. The memory of my decision to leave a year ago still found its way into my dreams. In the 3 years after we got back together, my relationship with Stella was suspended on a thin wire. I was as careful as if I were walking over a deep abyss. She would always ask, Oliver, are you just in this for the money? I would always shake my head and gently deny it. She would raise an eyebrow and smirk, not believing me at all. Stella treated me the way her rich friends treated their kept lovers. She gave gifts but didn't celebrate anniversaries. We had sex, but rarely companionship. She offered praise, but it was no longer sincere. There was less and less warmth, more and more indifference. The special red envelope she used to give me on New Year's Eve disappeared. Every interaction with her was laced with a test of my obedience. But I've always been goal-oriented and cared less about the process. As long as I could be with her, I could tolerate it. However, Stella shouldn't have crossed my bottom line, my career. A year ago, I received my job reassignment and equity agreement. It felt like I had been waiting 3 years for this exact moment, a trigger to let go of all my attachments. More than the humiliation at her family's home, this was the greatest insult of my life. I was demoted from director of sales to a regular team manager under Fiona. The explanation was that I needed to step back from the front lines. And in the equity agreement for the founding team, I was the only one who received not even a tenth of what I deserved. It was the middle of summer. A torrent of rage screamed in my mind, and I broke out in a cold sweat. For a long time, I just stood there for a long time. So long that Fiona smugly tossed a new ID badge at me, and only then did I snap out of it. I went to Stella's office to ask her about it. She was looking at a document. If you're with me, you shouldn't be fighting over these things, she said casually. A numbness crept up from my heels. I fought tooth and nail to bring in business. And with a few careless words, she negated it all? My eyes instantly turned red. My breathing grew rapid, and my voice was choked and hot, flushing my face. Stella sighed, troubled, and came over to take my hand. Her tone was incredibly gentle, but her words were utterly cruel. Oliver, was Vivian right? Were you just trying to cash in on my soft heart from the very beginning? Is that why you were willing to stay with me, even without a marriage certificate, just to latch onto my family? Her eyes were gentle and helpless, but her words were chilling. Do you really love me? Or do you love my family's money? Unfortunately for you, I'm not a fool. Your abilities don't justify that much equity. I looked at her. Carefully, meticulously, I took in every detail. She had silently eased my embarrassments, warmed my loneliness, and praised me without reservation. She was once my only light. Now that all the halos had faded, Stella was just like any other ordinary woman. So pragmatic, measuring sincerity with money. And so pathetic, thinking she was worth less than money. She judged my noble intentions with her own petty mindset. So unworthy. I let out a soft laugh and swiftly signed the equity contract. She visibly breathed a sigh of relief. Her slender but strong hand pulled me close, and she cooed in a hoarse voice, "You signed the contract. That means you've come to your senses." She was still testing my obedience. But I was done playing. I calmly left her office. The equity wasn't much, but it was still a few $100,000. It would vest in a year. A lot can happen in a year. I gradually had a luxury reseller come and take away all the gifts Stella had given me. I didn't want to see them, but I wasn't going to throw away money. I also started consolidating the investments I'd made following her lead, tying up loose ends before I left. I spent more time on sales, networking, and gathering information. Finally, 6 months ago, I found the right opportunity. A new company in Hong Kong needed a head of business development to break new ground. The boss was Victoria Sheng. Stella had a point when she said I was a social climber. In college, I was only able to avoid working part-time jobs and counting pennies for cafeteria meals because I ran errands for the wealthy Victoria. On one hand, I earned a full scholarship. On the other, Victoria opened my eyes to a wider world. The full scholarship money I'd saved was what gave me the courage to cut ties with my parents after graduation. It was also Victoria who introduced me to Stella's startup. That day, I bought the pastries she loved most in college.
I flew to Hong Kong over natt.
When she saw me late at night, she was surprised for a moment, then raised an eyebrow in displeasure. "Oliver, I brought you to Stella's company because I thought you'd make it to director of sales. What happened? You accomplished nothing?" She disdainfully took the pastries and walked away. She was still the same stunningly beautiful woman with a sharp tongue. Took 5 trips before Victoria was willing to sit down and talk with me. She smiled with a hint of warmth. "Even though you wasted so many years at Stella's, at least you're just like you were in college. You know when to cut your losses." She clicked across the floor in her high heels and lazily handed me a contract. "In college, you were always following me around, running errands. A lot of people looked down on you, but I didn't, because you know how to seize an opportunity and rise to the top." Being appreciated again after so long was gratifying, and my face flushed. When I saw the terms of the contract, my heart beat even faster. A base salary of $120,000 plus commission, conservatively, an income of at least $300,000 a year, far more than at Nexus. I signed it without hesitation. I cherished this opportunity. I just had to wait 6 months for my equity to vest, and then I would leave Bay City. In hindsight, all abrupt breakups are premeditated. I imagine that was true for Stella 3 years ago, too. On the day I left Bay City, I woke up early. The past few days, aside from work, I'd been spending all my time with Vivian. I was immersed in the feeling of being doted on, finally understanding the pleasure Victoria and Stella must have felt from my service. I felt like I was finally starting to unwind. Sipping a coffee Vivian had made, I looked out the window. The morning sun poured through gaps in the mist, dyeing Ridgemont in layers of orange and yellow. Vivian handed me my old, fully charged phone. It was flooded with missed calls and messages from Stella, sent in the morning, at night, and in the dead of night. I was in a good mood, so I patiently glanced through a few. At first, she was furious that I'd left without a word, her tone awful. "Come back when you're done with your tantrum. Be careful not to take this too far. Where can you even go? If you can't handle the business, you'll just end up back in your hometown wasting away." I found it both frustrating and amusing. Sorry to disappoint her, but I wasn't going to waste away. I was headed for a bigger world. Later, she started talking about everyday things, her way of showing she was softening. Mrs. Chun made that dish you used to love. In the early years, I would always clean my plate of Mrs. Chen's cooking because it was the best I could get. But now I had better options. The new bluefin tuna is in. I saved the fatty belly for you. I never liked sashimi, which was as exquisite and bland as she was. It was only that New Year's Eve bento box, delivered by her, that made me treasure it so much. Until yesterday, someone saw you and Vivian checking into a hotel. Oliver, were you in love with her back then? Did you only choose me for the money? Stella, the rich girl who had everything, was this insecure? I'm willing to marry you now. What does it mean that you're going back to her? Are you throwing it all away? Isn't it time to come to your senses? Oliver, you can't do this to me. That last line. She was begging me. It was followed by a photo. It was from when she was in the hospital. I was sitting by her bed, head down, peeling an apple. In the photo, I was bathed in sunlight, my short hair neat, my eyelashes dusted with golden light, perfectly calm, utterly focused. I scoffed. Fate is a cruel joke. Heaven sent her a serious illness, making her fall hopelessly in love with me. This was karma. This was retribution. For Stella's illness, her family had hired a top-tier medical team. There was no mortal danger, but there was still a high risk of nerve damage, disability, or paralysis. Her parents subtly and quickly shifted their favor to her less remarkable younger sister. During the pre-op tests and the uncertain recovery period, I was the only daily visitor to her hospital room. I would sit by her bed, either reading or peeling apples. Stella's gaze transformed from condescending and suspicious to certain and deeply affectionate. Love seemed to pour out from her eyes, but my heart was still as water. I wasn't there because I loved her. I was there to do my utmost duty, so I could leave later with a clear conscience and a ruthless heart. Messages from Stella kept popping up on my phone. Oliver, I really love you. Don't leave me. What great thing was her love? Was it worth me turning back again and again? Vivian and I walked out of the hotel. As I stepped through the lobby doors, I instinctively glanced back. In a gap between the revolving doors, I saw Stella. She wasn't sitting ramrod straight as usual. She was hunched over, her hands on her knees, her slender body slumped, her eyes dull. Even her makeup couldn't hide her exhaustion. It was hard to believe this was the same dazzling Stella. She wearily pinched the bridge of her nose. As she looked up, she saw me. The lobby was bustling with people, a murmur of voices, but she seemed frozen in time. As if bound by ropes, she couldn't move. Her eyes instantly reddened, locking onto me. As she stared, 2 lines of tears fell and vanished. I frowned, annoyed. When you love a woman, her vulnerability makes you want to protect her. When you don't, it's just irritating. That applies to everyone. By the time Stella slowly got up and started walking toward me, I was already in the car. The car pulled away quickly. In the rearview mirror, a figure stumbled after us. It disappeared in a moment. The drive to the airport was pleasant. The weather was perfect, the air mild. The image of Stella's shocked, pained eyes flashed through my mind. It was the same look I had when she ghosted me. For Stella, it was simply reaping what she had sown. Vivian sat beside me, an irrepressible smile playing on her lips. She sat a little too close. When we got to the airport, Vivian tried to take my bag, but I refused. I smiled politely. You should change your flight. Vivian's eyes widened slightly, her smile freezing. Vivian, I'm bringing you to Hong Kong because I value your pragmatism. I hope you'll appreciate this opportunity. I don't do office romances. She asked, Oliver, are you just using me and throwing me away? Then her tone softened. Give me a chance. We were in the same project group in college and I've always liked. I held up a finger to my lips in a shush gesture. In college, I was too busy with my studies and running errands for Victoria to pay much attention to anything else. But some things become clear with a little thought. It turns out women can be just as cunning and impossible to guard against. For example, 3 years ago, right after Stella had proposed to me, when I was on top of the world, Vivian suddenly kissed me on the cheek during a business meeting and said some bizarre things. Oliver, I really admire you. You rode Victoria's coattails to have an easy time in college. Then you rode Stella's to make a name for yourself in the workplace. Think you can give me a ride on your new tailwind? Of course, Stella happened to overhear, and it planted a seed of doubt in her mind. And then came the abrupt breakup. The root cause of our breakup was Stella's own insecurity and cowardice. But I don't like it when people make moves on me without my consent. This time, Stella finding out about me and Vivian at the hotel, that was probably Vivian's doing too. I said, Vivian, the opportunity in Hong Kong is important for both of us. Think it over. I respected her professional abilities, and I could afford her salary. Starting over, I needed someone I knew by my side. But she couldn't be making decisions that affected me without my knowledge. Vivian's throat moved. Her clear eyes were turbulent for a moment. Then she smiled gently, pretending to be nonchalant. I get it. I'll work hard. If her hand holding her phone wasn't trembling, I might have believed she could take it in stride. The plane took off. Bay City grew smaller in the tiny window, eventually disappearing into the clouds. In my 8th year in Bay City, I left. I left the big city I had once been willing to cut ties with my parents for. I left the city where I had once imagined growing old with Stella. Without love or hate, there is still the next, vaster life to live. Work is a strange thing. It's painful and exhausting, but it gives your mind a temporary peace. The start at the new company was as difficult as the hot, humid May in Hong Kong. But I got used to it. I worked day and night, finally making it to the cooler end of the year. The new company exceeded its performance targets, thanks to 2 old clients who followed me. Because of this, Fiona managed to get my number through a client. Her voice was hysterical, piercing my eardrum. Oliver, so it was you. You deliberately poached our department's biggest clients, didn't you? I used to think you weren't competitive, but you were just quietly playing the long game. I got fired because we lost those clients. Are you happy now? You're ruthless. Nexus lost 2 major clients. It won't meet the investors' targets this year. I was on a deadline for another client. I brought in more than half of Nexus's major clients, I said coolly. I wasn't competitive before because my eyes were on deals worth millions. Not on you. Don't you get it? Fiona, you're not even in my league. With that, I hung up. In Hong Kong, I go by Oliver. If I hadn't poached Nexus's clients, no one in Bay City would have known I'd relocated. I may be a social climber, but I won't be bullied without fighting back. I did get my revenge on Stella. Revenge wasn't just leaving her. I don't gamble on a woman's heart. It was taking her 2 biggest clients and sending an email to all the investors, making it clear that my relationship with Stella was just an act. The combination of poor performance and questions about her character made the investors lose a lot of faith in Nexus's future. Besides, there's only so much money in the market and an infinite number of companies looking for investment. Stella couldn't even sell a basic story about a couple building a company together. For investment brokers, switching to another company is easy. This would be enough to keep Stella buried in trouble for a long time. Just then, Vivian handed me a hot coffee and a sandwich. Mr. Dawson, it's 2 p.m. You should have some lunch. I glanced at her and took a few quick bites. The knot in my stomach loosened a bit. Vivian continued, Nexus is in a pretty bad situation now that they've lost 2 major clients. I think we can press our advantage. I smiled at her and went back to my work. Vivian acted as if nothing had happened. She was very cunning. But during busy times, her thoughtfulness was particularly prominent and always perfectly timed. She would help me coordinate all my suits and accessories. She would instruct my secretary to schedule physical therapy sessions for me during my breaks. She also arranged for a regular cleaning service for my apartment. I didn't have to worry about any of the trivial details. I had just lived through the busiest year of my life and also the most well cared for. In January, I returned to Bay City for my year-end report to Victoria. Victoria was busy with the integration of the Shang Corporation. She just wrote me a large check. You know I'm busy. I just need to see the results. You handle next year's plan. I'll look at it when I have time. Her wavy brown hair was loosely draped over her back. She smiled. By the way, I'm announcing my engagement tonight. You guys should come. The party was a well-known charity gala in Bay City. I wore a well-fitted black suit with elegant cufflinks, looking respectable yet understated. As I came out of the dressing room, I ran into Stella. She was smoking a slim cigarette, the smoke slowly dissipating from her lips. She was still beautiful but different. She looked like a water-damaged photograph, brittle and tinged with a damp gloom. When she saw me, the cigarette fell from her fingers. I gave her a polite nod. I felt nothing for her anymore, which was why I could be so calm. She lowered her head and gave a self-deprecating laugh. I must be dreaming again. The corners of her long, narrow eyes crinkled, and faint crow's feet appeared, tinged with a light red. Long time no see, Ms. Lin, I said, making small talk. Stella kept her head down, motionless. The long corridor was silent. She woodenly turned her eyes toward me. Oliver? Stella looked as if she had just woken from a dream. She stumbled slightly, then took one step, then another, moving faster and faster. When she reached me, her hands opened helplessly before she carefully placed them on my shoulders. She let out a long, slow breath. Thank God. Thank God I could see you again. Her eyes were completely red. She smiled the smile of someone who has recovered something precious. Oliver, have you punished me enough? Are you back now? You're all I have, Oliver. I'd heard that Nexus had been having some operational problems in the last 6 months, and Stella's relationship with her family had reached a freezing point. Suddenly, she pulled me into her arms. Her whole body was trembling, a low rumble coming from her chest. I'm so glad you're back. Pushed her away. Stella, I said distantly, I told you. We're done. The ever-proud woman suddenly choked up. Oliver, you can't do this to me. I love you so much. I sighed, exasperated. As she looked at me with pleading eyes, I took a step back. Stella, are you ever going to learn to listen to what I say? I've been gone for a year. She shook her head in disbelief. I don't believe it. You stayed with me through my surgery. Why would you leave? She was still stuck in that moment, unable to move on. True, how can you move on from an emotional peak? I was awful to you so many times. Why would you leave right after my surgery was a success?
I left her here.
And what makes you think I wouldn't have left if your surgery had failed? Her face went pale. Stella, you know what? When people go above and beyond to do the right thing at the end, it's so they can be ruthless later with a clear conscience. She froze, unable to move. I turned to leave. Her lower lip trembled. You were there for me when I had no dignity 3 years ago, and during the humiliation of my illness. If you say you don't love me, if it was really for the money, then why would you leave now, when I'm truly willing to marry you?
I glänste her, snering.
Stella, your family's assets are all in your parents' hands. The company shares have been sorted out. How much can you really give me? And besides, I said, delivering the cold, hard truth, I was planning to break up with you even before your surgery. You know how it is. Abrupt breakups are always premeditated. Stella's body slumped, and she crouched on the floor, clutching her chest. One should never be obsessed with finding an answer, because the answer is often not what you want to hear. A year later, she had finally gotten an answer that took her breath away. I could faintly hear her gasping for air. It sounded like she was in agony. I understood. Of course, I understood the devastating blow of being ghosted by the person you believed was your one and only love, because I had been through it. Ghosting, you think it's just not talking? It's going from good morning and good night one day to complete silence the next. It's every message being read but not answered, every call going through but not picked up. It's being suddenly told, I don't love you anymore. Fatal blow. It doesn't just strip you of your self-respect, it shatters your world. For years ago, that's what she did to me. She disappeared 3 days after she had publicly proposed to me. I was still on a high, dreaming of our future, when my beloved suddenly vanished. Her mother came to see me, handing me a long credit card statement. Mr. Dawson, everyone in Bay City is now saying you're my family's official son-in-law. I smiled politely. Of course, I believed I would be her husband. Her mother's voice was refined but firm. You two need to break up. Our family has a reputation to uphold. You can date my daughter, but you can't be husband and wife. We do not welcome people of humble origins. My mouth fell open. She took a sip of her tea. The high-limit credit card Stella uses is under my name. If you don't leave her, I can demand repayment for all the gifts and dating expenses. It's not easy for you to be alone in Bay City. You wouldn't want to see your savings wiped out, would you? And with a bad reputation, you won't be able to find a new job. My fingers trembled as I dialed Stella's number. No answer. I tried calling her on social media. Still no response. I asked her secretary, who told me she had left for a vacation 10 days ago. A chill spread through my trembling fingers. After forcing myself to calm down, I went to her apartment. I entered the familiar passcode again and again. The door wouldn't open. It wasn't until the lock coldly announced, "Lockdown activated," that I stopped. I stood in the marble hallway for a long time. So long that my feet, clad in leather shoes, went completely numb, unable to move. My vision blurred and cleared, blurred and cleared. Outside the floor-to-ceiling window at the end of the hall, the downtown skyscrapers lit up like stars against the evening sky. The housekeeper, Mrs. Chun, returned. "Oh, Mr. Dawson, you're here. Why aren't you going in?" I gave an awkward smile. Mrs. Chun opened the door with her fingerprint. The housekeeper had fingerprint access to an apartment where I no longer even knew the passcode. The lock chirped. Lock disengaged. Strange, what disengaged? Mrs. Chun muttered, then asked, "Hey, Mr. Dawson, aren't you coming in?" I dazedly shook my head and turned to leave. A message came from Stella's secretary. "Ms. Lin says to give the A Corp account to Fiona." My extreme anger turned into a speechless smile. I had spent 3 months coordinating with that client across time zones, flying back and forth a dozen times to land them. Now, with a single sentence, it was being handed over. My knees gave out and I stumbled to the ground. My palms stung as they hit the smooth floor. Tears, glinting in the golden light, splattered onto the ornate marble. Without Stella, my love was gone. Without her, my revalued equity was gone. My career had vanished into thin air. I sat helplessly on the floor, looking out the window. The starry lights of the downtown skyline seemed to mock me. "Oliver, nobody in this world loves you. Oliver, you have nothing." I looked down dispassionately as Stella's shoulders shook with sobs. My world had already collapsed once. Now it was just her turn. Reaping what you sow. By the time I returned to the ballroom, the charity gala was in full swing. Victoria pulled me around, introducing me to people. Clearly, now that the new company was on track, she was ready to leverage her Bay City connections. When she brought me before Stella's parents, her mother's lip curled almost imperceptibly. But they had to nod and smile at me politely. The Shung family was one of their law firm's top clients. A complete power play. Victoria held her wine glass casually, a smile on her red lips. "Mr. and Mrs. Lin, I was the one who introduced Oliver to Stella's company. It's a shame his career didn't take off there, and his relationship didn't either. Stella must have been bad luck for him. Look how well he's doing in Hong Kong now. You're not really cut out for this industry. If it were me, I'd have paid $1 million dowry to make him Stella's husband and the true master of Nexus. Now he's Nexus's most formidable competitor." Victoria was famously protective of her own. Under the bright crystal chandeliers, Stella's parents' faces turned ashen, looking utterly awful. But they still had to smile and agree. Whispers broke out around us, and some people even chuckled softly. Everyone in Bay City's high society knew that Stella's family had looked down on and belittled me. This plot twist was better than a TV show. Victoria continued to introduce me to some of Bay City's old money families. Later, other notable executives also came over to chat and toast with me. I responded in a low voice. Power slowly flowed back to me from all directions. A deep, inexpressible joy grew inside me. I was finally back at the table. Through the clinking glasses and mingling crowd, I saw Stella. She was watching me from a corner, looking completely lost. I raised my glass to her and smiled. I wondered if, in the future, I would be the one to push her off the table. The party ended, and I was slightly drunk.
Stella walked over.
She asked, I just want to know, were you ever sincere? Did you ever truly love me? Or was it Vivian you loved? I didn't answer her. I told the driver to go. No response, no entanglement, no shared karma. I entered my hotel suite and stumbled onto the sofa. Outside the window was still Ridgemont, the streetlights winding their way up. I took out my wallet and pulled a folded photo from a hidden compartment. I hadn't been able to throw this one away. In my heart, I had once believed I had married Stella, on that day. In the photo, my fingers were spread wide, proudly showing off the simple band on my ring finger to the camera. My smile was so wide it was as if I owned the world. 4 years ago, she proposed to me at the office. It was the proudest, happiest moment of my life. My career was soaring, and the woman I loved wanted to marry me. Back then, she had told me, Oliver, I love your vitality. I love your courage to go after whatever you want with everything you have. My love for you is as natural and inevitable as the sun rising and the moon hanging low in the sky. But then the moon broke its promise, and the sun set. Everything went downhill. I held the photo to my nose, blew it into the air, and let it fall. I blew it again and it landed on the floor nearby. But it didn't matter. Everything was getting better. The doorbell rang. I got up to open it, stepping on the photo without bothering to pick it up. The door opened. Vivian was wrapped in a cashmere coat, her nose red. She smiled and lied. I just happened to be back in Bay City visiting family. Her clear eyes reflected the bright lights from the ceiling. She said gently, you said you were at a party tonight. You must have had a lot to drink. She held up the container in her hand. Have some congee to warm your stomach. I smiled slowly and let her in. Time and I were finally moving forward. Epilogue. Oliver was a boy bursting with life. 3 months into starting the company, only Oliver remained at Nexus. I was disappointed but mostly indifferent. For a rich girl, a failed startup is normal. I could just go home and do what my parents told me. But Oliver didn't say a word. He buried his head in the business plans, made calls, and worked for 3 straight nights. He handed me the marked-up business plan, looking exhausted. His gentle voice held a low plea. Stella, I think these deals have potential. The company can survive. In the end, I kept the company going. We were so busy. The most absurd time was when we both drank so much we ended up coughing up blood. We were in the emergency room, pale-faced, looking at each other with wry smiles. But the company was gaining more and more momentum. The cheap spices from his takeout box made the small garage office feel dizzying. I started having my housekeeper bring an extra portion for him. Back then, the smile on his lips was faint. He would secretly turn away, his eyes growing wet. My heart skipped a beat. Strange. It was just a small gesture. I had my housekeeper bring over a whole set of bedding. Sometimes, if I passed a luxury store and saw a nice suit, I'd buy it for him. The company survived its first year. My parents started to take me seriously. Our family, the Lins, were maybe 9th tier in the city's hierarchy of old money with 5 children. We were destined to be excellent just to get our parents' attention, to receive any love beyond money. Oh right, the money wasn't given to us directly either. We each had a high-limit supplementary card from our parents. If they were displeased, we faced the risk of being cut off financially. That's why I wanted to try starting a business. My parents agreeing to invest the next year was a real sign of recognition. I paid for Oliver's bonus out of my own pocket. When he saw the amount, he cried and laughed at the same time. When he looked at me with tears in his eyes, they sparkled like the Milky Way. My heart ached so much that I laughed out loud. It was so strange. My small gestures could make such an excellent, capable boy so grateful. That New Year's Eve, I went to see him. He secretly got teary-eyed again. For 3 years, Nexus grew bigger and bigger, and Oliver became more and more vibrant and capable. That New Year's Eve, he kissed me. I just felt a warmth in my chest, so I kissed him back, and we naturally got together. In the 5th year, Oliver landed a huge client, and our first round of funding was basically secured. That night, in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, I held him, spun him around in the apartment, kissed him, and we went to bed. When it was all over, we lay on the bed, illuminated by moonlight and neon, just talking. His fair skin looked strong in the moonlight. He lazily twirled his short hair with his fingers, talking about work. In that moment, it felt like the sun was high and the moon was low. His vibrant life force flowed into my heart, and I think I knew for sure that I loved him. He was the man I wanted to spend my life with. I proposed to him in grand fashion, and he agreed, his eyes red with happy tears. The next day, my mother ordered us to break up. The family business will be yours to inherit one day. Your husband can't just be a capable sales manager. You understand, wealth needs to be passed down and built upon step by step. I didn't say anything. I was hesitant and cowardly. I felt ashamed again. A 27-year-old woman, still afraid of her parents' authority. In front of me, my mother called the CFO and told him to halt the next 6 months of funding for Nexus. At the same time, she canceled my credit card. It was ironic. The family's money went into Nexus's books, but my personal cash flow was very low. So low that I couldn't make the next mortgage payment of over $10,000 on my apartment. I fell silent. When I got back to the company, Vivian, that woman who was always coming to see Oliver over some minor business, was there again. I was even more irritated. I overheard their conversation. She was telling Oliver he was only with me to get ahead. Oliver just laughed and didn't deny it. So if I couldn't help him get ahead, would he leave me? I was terrified, a coward. I followed my mother's advice and ghosted him. But then the capable Oliver said he would stay with me even without getting married. Why didn't he want the title of a real husband? Shouldn't he have said he would do whatever it took to be my real husband? I was both disappointed and angry. In the 3 years that followed, I wasn't good to Oliver. I hated him for being with me for money. I had to clip his wings. That way he'd feel insecure and never be able to fly away. So I marginalized him, demoted him, and gave him the smallest possible equity. That way, how could he dare to leave? Perhaps even God couldn't stand it and made me sick. My parents were as pragmatic as ever. They had no time for a daughter who could be cast aside at any moment. They had work to do and for other children to invest in. But Oliver was always there. After my surgery, I was incapacitated, lying in bed all day. He would just sit by my bed, his gaze calm.
No desgosto, no desappointimento, no contempte.
If he was with me for my family's money and status, then I would give it to him. I would work hard my whole life to make money for him. I would inherit the family business for him. I would marry him, but he didn't want it anymore. He disappeared completely, right when I loved him most. What goes around comes around. The pain of that abrupt breakup came back to haunt me. It was too late. It was the cowardly, insecure Stella who wasn't worthy of the vibrant, ambitious Oliver.